The gift. The sun was setting, painting the sky with streaks of orange and purple. John Carter, a simple man in his late 20s, sat on the worn-out couch of his modest apartment. Life had been uneventful lately. He worked a dull job, came home to an empty place, and spent his evenings scrolling through endless streams of online content. That was until a strange knock at his door shattered his routine. It wasn't the usual tap-tap of a neighbor asking for sugar or the delivery guy dropping off a pizza. It was a deep, deliberate knock, almost echoing through the quiet hallway. John frowned. He wasn't expecting anyone. Cautiously, he got up and peeked through the peephole. All he saw was a sleek, metallic box sitting on his doorstep. Opening the door, he looked around. The hallway was empty. No footsteps, no voices, nothing. Just the box. It was about the size of a small suitcase, smooth and silver, with strange glowing symbols etched into its surface. Hesitating for a moment, John leaned down and picked it up. Despite its metallic appearance, it felt surprisingly light. Back inside, he placed the box on his coffee table, staring at it like it might explode. "Okay, this is weird," he muttered. As if in response, the symbols on the box lit up brighter, and a faint hum filled the air. Before he could decide whether to run or stay, the top of the box slid open with a hiss. Inside were two figures. At first glance, they looked human, tall, slender, and stunningly beautiful. But their shimmering skin, glowing violet eyes, and intricate markings on their arms made it clear they were something else entirely. Aliens. John's heart raced. He blinked, wondering if he had accidentally inhaled some hallucinogenic fumes. One of the aliens stepped forward, her movements graceful, almost floating. She had long, silver hair that seemed to sparkle under the dim apartment lights. Her gaze locked onto John, and when she spoke, her voice was melodic yet commanding. "John Carter, you have been chosen." He took a step back, his knees almost giving way. "Chosen? Chosen for what? And how do you know my name?" The second alien, who had a fiercer demeanor with short, metallic blue hair and piercing eyes, crossed her arms and smirked. "You're famous where we come from, though you don't seem very impressive in person." "Famous?" John stammered. "I'm just a regular guy. I don't even have a TikTok account." The silver-haired alien smiled gently. "You saved our species." John's confusion deepened. "I think you've got the wrong guy. I've never even left Earth." The blue-haired alien rolled her eyes. Typical human, oblivious to the consequences of their own actions. "Wait," John said, holding up his hands. "Explain." Slowly, the silver-haired alien stepped closer, her tone softening. "Do you remember a year ago, when you broadcasted a signal into space using a satellite dish? It was a small experiment, nothing extraordinary by your standards." John nodded. He'd almost forgotten about it. His friend had convinced him to mess around with a homemade satellite dish and send a simple radio signal out into the void. A silly hobby project. That signal, the alien continued, contained a harmonic sequence. It aligned perfectly with our genetic frequency, stabilizing the degradation that was destroying our species. Without it, we would have perished. John's jaw dropped. "That was accidental. I didn't even know anyone was out there." "Intentional or not," she said, "you are now seen as a savior among our people, and as a token of our gratitude, we have been sent to you." "Sent to me," John repeated, his voice rising. "What does that even mean? Are you my alien roommates now?" The blue-haired alien chuckled. "We are much more than that. We are your gift." John stared at her blankly. "Gift? Like what? I don't need a gift. Can I return it?" The silver-haired alien shook her head. "Our species' survival depends on you. We require your participation." "Participation?" John frowned. Then it hit him. His face turned crimson. "Wait, are you saying?" "Yes," the blue-haired alien interrupted, clearly enjoying his discomfort. "Mating. You're the key to creating a hybrid species that will carry our legacy forward. John stumbled back, knocking into the coffee table. This is insane. There's no way. Before he could finish, a loud beep filled the room. The silver-haired alien tilted her head as if listening to something. Her calm expression turned serious. They found us. Who's they? John asked, panic rising in his chest. The blue-haired alien grabbed a sleek device from the box, her demeanor shifting into full warrior mode. Enemies. Not everyone wants this hybrid plan to succeed. They're here to stop us. John's heart raced as the faint hum of an approaching ship filled the air. He ran to the window and saw a shadowy object hovering in the sky, its lights flashing ominously. "This can't be happening," he muttered, his voice trembling. "It's happening," the blue-haired alien said, smirking as she readied a weapon that looked like a futuristic crossbow. "Welcome to your new life, Savior." The room shook as a bright beam of light shot down from the hovering ship. John's quiet, boring life was officially over. And it had only just begun. Unveiling the truth. The small apartment was no longer quiet. The hum of alien technology mixed with John's racing thoughts as he paced the room. The two alien women stood calmly, a stark contrast to the chaos brewing inside John's head. The warrior, with her metallic blue hair and piercing eyes, leaned against the wall, her weapon still at the ready. The silver-haired diplomat, serene and composed, observed John with a faint smile. "You've got to explain this better," John said, finally stopping. "Why me? And what exactly did I do to get two aliens and a death sentence dropped on my doorstep?" The silver-haired alien, who had introduced herself as Lyris, gestured for John to sit. "It's a long story, but you deserve to know the truth." John hesitated, then sat on the edge of his couch, feeling like he was trapped in some bizarre sci-fi movie. The blue-haired warrior, Xyret, snorted. "Let's hope he can handle it." Lyris shot her a warning look before turning back to John. "A year ago, you sent a signal into space. That signal was more important than you could have imagined. It contained harmonic frequencies that resonated with our DNA structure, stabilizing a genetic flaw that has been killing our people for centuries." John blinked. "But that was just a hobby project. My friend and I were messing around with a satellite dish. We didn't even know anyone would hear it. Intentional or not," Lyris said, her voice soft, "you saved us. The signal you sent spread across our planet, neutralizing the genetic decay that was wiping out entire generations. You became a hero in our eyes." "Hero?" John scoffed. "I didn't even know you existed until about 20 minutes ago." Sarah chuckled, a sharp, sarcastic sound. "Humans, always so clueless." Lyris ignored her and continued. "After your signal saved us, our leaders decided that we couldn't let our survival depend on chance. They proposed a plan to strengthen our species by creating hybrids, offspring that could inherit the best of both our species." John's stomach twisted. "Let me guess. That's where I come in." Lyris nodded. "Your DNA is unique. It's compatible with ours in ways we've never seen before. You're not just a savior. You're the key to our future." "Okay," John said, holding up his hands. "Let's just pump the brakes here. I'm not some intergalactic stud for hire. I don't even know how to process any of this. And what about that ship outside? Who's trying to kill us?" Zyra stepped forward, her expression hard. "Not everyone agrees with the hybridization plan. Some believe we should remain pure, even if it means extinction. Others fear the hybrids could disrupt the balance of power in the galaxy. That ship belongs to one of those factions." "So," John said, leaning back, "I'm not just a savior, I'm also a target." "Exactly," Zyra said, her tone unapologetic. "But don't worry. We're here to protect you." "That's comforting," John muttered, rubbing his temples. "What happens now? Do I just agree to this plan? Save your species and hope I don't get vaporized in the process?" Lyris smiled gently, We won't force you to do anything, John. This is your choice. But know that without your help, our species will face extinction." John looked between the two aliens, his mind spinning. On one hand, he wanted to tell them to leave, to take their galactic drama somewhere else. But on the other, he couldn't ignore the weight of what they were saying. He had saved their species once, even if by accident. Could he really turn his back on them now? Before he could answer, the apartment shook. A loud, metallic crash echoed from the hallway, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps. "They're here," Exira said, her voice a mix of excitement and determination. She readied her weapon and moved to the door. "Stay behind us, human." "John," he corrected automatically, but Exira was already in battle mode. Lyris stepped beside her, holding a small, glowing orb that pulsed with energy. The door burst open, and 3 armored figures stormed in, their faces obscured by sleek helmets. They moved with precision, their weapons aimed directly at the trio. John froze, his heart pounding in his chest. Zyra didn't hesitate. She leaped forward, her weapon firing a bolt of energy that struck one of the intruders, sending them crashing into the wall. The second attacker aimed at her, but Lyris raised her orb, creating a shimmering shield that deflected the blast. "John," Lyris called out. "Stay down." John ducked behind the couch, peeking out just in time to see Tyra engage the third intruder in hand-to-hand combat. She moved like a whirlwind, her strikes precise and powerful. Within seconds, all 3 attackers were incapacitated, their weapons scattered across the floor. Zara smirked, wiping her hands. "Amateurs." Lyris stepped forward, examining one of the unconscious intruders. "They won't stop coming," she said, her voice somber. "We need to leave. Now." "Leave?" John asked, standing up. "Go where?" "To our homeworld," Lyris said. "You'll be safer there. And it's the only place where we can properly explain everything and give you the time to decide." John hesitated. The idea of leaving Earth, of stepping into a world he couldn't even begin to understand, was terrifying. But staying here, waiting for the next wave of attackers, wasn't much better. "Fine," he said finally. "But you two better promise me one thing." "What's that?" Zyra asked, raising an eyebrow. "No more surprises." Sarah and Lyris exchanged a glance, then smiled. "We'll do our best," Lyris said. John sighed. Something told him his life was about to get a lot more complicated. The galactic conspiracy, the sharp hum of alien engines, filled the air as the sleek spacecraft pierced through Earth's atmosphere. John sat strapped into his seat, his fingers gripping the armrests like a lifeline. He glanced at Lyris, who was seated calmly beside him, her glowing silver hair flowing gently despite the zero-gravity environment. Across from them, Thyra adjusted her weaponry, her sharp eyes scanning the controls as if expecting an attack at any moment. "How much longer?" John asked, his voice shaky. The entire situation still felt surreal. One moment he was a regular guy in his tiny apartment, and the next he was aboard an alien ship fleeing for his life. "Not long," Lyris replied, her voice soothing. "We'll enter the slipstream shortly, and then it will only take a few hours to reach our homeworld." Thyra snorted. "If we don't get ambushed first." John's stomach churned. "That's reassuring. Thanks." As the ship began to stabilize, Lyris turned to John, her violet eyes glowing faintly. "Now that we're out of immediate danger, I think it's time you learn more about what's at stake." John sighed, leaning back in his seat. "Fine. Lay it on me. What's the real deal here? Why is everyone so obsessed with stopping this hybrid plan?" Lyris exchanged a glance with Zyra, who shrugged. "He's already in this mess. Might as well tell him." "All right," Lyris began, her tone serious. "Our species, the Cerulean, has been on the brink of extinction for centuries. Our genetics have deteriorated due to prolonged exposure to a dying star. The signal you sent provided temporary relief, but it wasn't a permanent solution. That's why the hybridization project was proposed. By merging with compatible DNA, we could create a new generation of Cerealin capable of surviving and thriving. John nodded slowly. Okay, I get that. But why would anyone want to stop you? It sounds like a good thing. It is, Lyris said. But not everyone sees it that way. Some factions within our society believe that introducing foreign DNA will destroy our culture and identity. They call themselves the purists. To them, extinction is preferable to corruption. Lovely, John muttered. Bigots in space. Great. That's not the worst of it. Katira cut in, her voice sharp. The purists aren't the only problem. The Galactic Council, the ruling body of our region of space, fears what hybrids could mean for the balance of power. They think a stronger Cerealin race could disrupt their control. So, John said, his brows furrowing, this isn't just about saving your species. It's about politics. Lyris nodded. Unfortunately, yes. By agreeing to help us, you've become a threat not just to the purists, but to powerful forces across the galaxy. John ran a hand through his hair. And here I thought my biggest problem was paying rent. Zyra smirked. Welcome to the big leagues, human. Before John could reply, the ship jolted violently. Alarms blared, and a voice, calm yet urgent, spoke in an alien language through the ship's speakers. We're being pulled out of the slipstream. Lyris exclaimed, her eyes wide. Zyra sprang into action, gripping the controls. It's an interdiction field. Someone's waiting for us. John's heart raced as the ship was yanked back into normal space. Outside the viewport, a massive vessel loomed, its sleek, black hull bristling with weapons. It dwarfed their ship, its design menacing and predatory. Let me guess, John said, his voice trembling. Those are the bad guys. Worse, Zyra growled. That's a purist warship. The communication panel crackled, and a deep, commanding voice filled the cabin. Cerealin vessel, this is Captain Viron of the Purist Fleet. Surrender the human, and you will be spared. John's stomach dropped. Surrender the human. That's me. Zyra scowled. No one's surrendering you, Carter, over my dead body. Let's hope it doesn't come to that, Lyris said, her tone grim. She pressed a button on the console, opening a channel. Captain Viron, this is Ambassador Lyris. The human is under our protection. Any act of aggression will be considered a declaration of war. There was a pause, then a cold laugh. You Cerealin cling to your delusions of power. Your species is weak, and your hybrid plan is an affront to our heritage. Stand down, or face the consequences. Brace yourselves, Zyra said, gripping the controls tightly. They're not bluffing. The warship fired without warning, a barrage of energy blasts streaking toward their ship. The cabin shook violently as Tyra maneuvered to evade the attack. Hold on, she shouted. John clung to his seat, his knuckles white. This is not what I signed up for. You signed up the moment you sent that signal. Zyra shot back, her eyes locked on the controls. Lyris reached out, her hands glowing as she activated the ship's defensive systems. A shimmering energy field surrounded them, deflecting some of the incoming blasts, but the smaller ship was no match for the Purist warship. We can't fight them head-on, Lyris said, her voice strained. We need to escape. Zyra nodded. There's a nearby asteroid field. If we can make it there, we might be able to lose them. The ship dove toward the field, weaving through the jagged rocks as the Purist warship pursued them. John felt his stomach churn as the ship twisted and turned, narrowly avoiding collisions. This is insane, he yelled. Are you sure you know what you're doing? Zyra grinned, her eyes glinting with excitement. I've been flying since before you were born, human. Relax. John wasn't reassured. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the Purist ship broke off its pursuit, unable to navigate the dense asteroid field. Zyra let out a triumphant laugh. That's right. Run, cowards. Lyris slumped in her seat, exhausted. "We're safe. For now." John exhaled shakily, his mind racing. The truth about the hybrid plan, the purists, and the Galactic Council was more than he bargained for. But one thing was clear, there was no turning back now. "Safe," he muttered. "If this is safe, I don't want to see dangerous." Zyra smirked. "You'll get used to it, Carter. Welcome to the fight." As the ship set course for the Cerulean homeworld, John couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The stakes were higher than he'd ever imagined, and the galaxy wasn't about to let him off easy. Journey to the alien world. The silence after their escape from the purist warship was deafening. John sat in his seat, trying to process the whirlwind of events that had turned his mundane life into an interstellar drama. Across from him, Zyra was tinkering with her weapon, her sharp features set in a look of concentration. Lyris stood at the front of the ship, gazing out at the endless expanse of stars as the vessel cruised through slipstream space. "How much longer?" John asked, breaking the quiet. Lyris turned, her silver hair shimmering like liquid light. "We're close. The Cerulean homeworld is just beyond this jump point." John leaned back, exhaling. "Good. Maybe when we get there, I can finally catch a break." Zyra snorted. "Don't count on it, human. Our world is beautiful, sure, but it's not exactly peaceful right now." "What do you mean?" John asked, his brow furrowing. Lyris hesitated, then walked over to sit beside him. "The purists aren't just a fringe group, John. They've infiltrated parts of our government, stirring fear and doubt about the hybridization plan. The council is divided. Some support the project, while others secretly work to undermine it." "Great," John muttered. "So I'm walking into a political minefield." "Not just political," Zyra said, looking up from her weapon. "There's a good chance they'll try to kill you again. You're the symbol of the plan they hate." "Fantastic," John said, rubbing his temples. "This just keeps getting better." The ship shuddered slightly, and Lyris stood. "We're here." John looked out the viewport as the slipstream dissolved into real space. What he saw stole his breath. The Cerulean homeworld, Eloria, was unlike anything he had ever imagined. A planet of iridescent blues and greens, its surface shimmered as if made of glass. Towering crystal spires rose from the land, reflecting the light of 3 suns. Vast oceans glittered like liquid diamonds, and floating islands hovered in the atmosphere, connected by glowing energy bridges. It was both alien and breathtakingly beautiful. "Wow," John whispered. "It's incredible." Lyris smiled softly. "Welcome to Eloria, the heart of the Cerulean people." As they approached, the ship descended toward a massive city built into a sprawling canyon of crystal. The buildings seemed to grow naturally from the landscape, their architecture both elegant and otherworldly. The air itself shimmered with faint ethereal light. But as they drew closer, John noticed something unsettling. Groups of Cerulean citizens were gathered in the streets, holding banners and chanting. Some of the banners displayed glowing symbols of unity, but others bore the jagged insignia of the purists. "What's going on down there?" John asked, leaning forward. "Protests," Zyra said grimly. "Tensions are high. The purists have been rallying more support, and the council hasn't done much to stop them. They fear escalating the conflict," Lyris added, "but their inaction only emboldens the opposition." The ship landed smoothly on a glowing platform surrounded by tall spires. A group of Cerulean officials was waiting, their ornate robes shimmering like liquid metal. Lyris stepped forward, her posture regal and composed. Zyra followed, her hand resting on her weapon. John hesitated before stepping out, feeling entirely out of place in his jeans and hoodie. "Ambassador Lyris," one of the officials greeted, bowing slightly. His eyes flicked to John, narrowing. "And this must be the human." "Yes," Lyris said, her tone diplomatic. "This is John Carter, the one who saved our people." The official's expression was unreadable. "The council is waiting. We must proceed at once." As they made their way through the city, John couldn't help but feel the weight of hundreds of eyes on him. Cerulean citizens lined the streets, some staring in awe, others with open hostility. A few even hissed under their breath, their glowing markings flaring briefly. "They don't look too happy to see me," John whispered to Syra. "They're not," she replied bluntly. "To them, you're either a savior or a threat. No in between." The group entered a towering building made of translucent crystal. Inside, the air was cool and heavy with the hum of energy. They were led into a grand chamber where the Cerulean Council sat in a semicircle, their robes glimmering like starlight. The tension in the room was palpable. "Ambassador Lyris," the council leader began, his voice calm but firm. "You have returned, and you have brought the human. This is significant." John stood awkwardly, unsure if he should bow or wave. He opted for a small nod, feeling completely out of his depth. "The purists are gaining ground," another council member said, her tone accusatory. "Bringing the human here only adds fuel to the fire. Do you realize the risk you've taken?" "The risk was necessary," Lyris said firmly. "John Carter is not just a symbol. He is our best chance for survival. Without him, our species will perish." A murmur rippled through the chamber. Some council members nodded in agreement, while others exchanged skeptical glances. One of the council members, a stern-looking man with sharp features, leaned forward. "And what of the purists? They will not stand by and watch this happen. They will escalate their attacks." "Let them try," Syra said, her voice cold. "We're ready for them." "Are we?" the council leader asked, his gaze piercing. "Or are we leading our people into a conflict we cannot win?" John felt the weight of their words pressing down on him. This wasn't just about him anymore. The survival of an entire species, and possibly the stability of the galaxy, rested on his shoulders. "I didn't ask for this," he said, stepping forward. "I didn't ask to be a savior or a target. But if there's one thing I've learned in the past few days, it's that your people are worth fighting for. I may not have all the answers, but I'm here now. And I'm not running away." The chamber fell silent. For a moment, John thought he'd said the wrong thing. Then, slowly, Lyris smiled. Even Syra gave him an approving nod. The council leader studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Very well. The human will stay. But know this, John Carter, your presence here will bring both hope and danger. Be prepared for what lies ahead." As the meeting ended, John felt a mix of pride and fear. He had taken the first step into a world far beyond anything he'd known. But deep down, he knew the hardest challenges were yet to come. The hidden threat. The Cerulean Palace was a masterpiece of crystalline architecture, its glowing walls pulsating with faint, rhythmic light, as if the entire structure was alive. John had been given a private suite, a sprawling space with translucent walls that overlooked the shimmering city below. But despite the luxury, he felt more like a prisoner than a guest. He stood by the window, staring out at the streets where the protests continued. Even from this height, he could hear the faint hum of chanting, the clash of ideologies boiling beneath the serene surface of Eloria. The door to his suite slid open, and Sarah strode in, her armored boots clicking against the polished floor. "You've got a visitor," she said, leaning casually against the doorframe. John turned, raising an eyebrow. "Let me guess, another council member here to remind me how much they don't trust me." Syra smirked. "Not quite." Behind her, Lyris entered, carrying a small glowing device. Her serene expression was tinged with concern. "We need to talk, John." "About what?" he asked, sitting on the edge of the ornate crystal bed. "The protests, the purists, or the fact that I've become public enemy number one in half the galaxy." Lyris placed the device on the table, its light casting soft shadows across the room. "About the purists, and something far more dangerous." Sarah closed the door and crossed her arms, We've uncovered evidence that the purists have infiltrated our inner circles. They're not just gaining support in the streets. They've planted agents within the council itself. John frowned. How is that even possible? You're saying your own government is working against you? Lyris nodded. Yes. And it gets worse. We believe they've developed a new weapon. Something powerful enough to destroy entire cities. If they succeed, they could bring Aloria to its knees and blame it on the hybridization plan. Wait, John said, holding up a hand. You're telling me they're willing to wipe out their own people just to stop this plan? That's exactly what we're saying. Syra replied, her voice sharp. The purists are fanatics. To them, sacrificing a few million lives is worth preserving their purity. John felt a chill run down his spine. So what's the plan? How do we stop them? Lyris tapped the glowing device, and a holographic map of the city appeared. It highlighted a sector on the outskirts, near a sprawling crystal canyon. Our sources indicate that the weapon is being developed here, in a hidden facility beneath the surface. If we can infiltrate it and destroy the prototype, we can buy ourselves time. Infiltrate, John repeated, his stomach sinking. That sounds dangerous. It is, Kagzyra said, grinning, which is why I'm leading the mission. And I assume I'm not going, right? John asked hopefully. Lyris hesitated. Actually, you are. What? John exclaimed, standing up. Why? I'm not a soldier. I'm just a guy who accidentally sent a signal into space. You're more than that, Lyris said gently. The purists are obsessed with stopping you because they see you as a threat. If we're going to draw attention away from the mission, we need you to be visible, to act as a distraction. John stared at her, his heart racing. You're using me as bait. It's not as bad as it sounds, Kagzyra said, her smirk returning. You'll be safe. Mostly. Mostly, John repeated, his voice rising. That's not comforting. Lyris placed a hand on his shoulder. I know this isn't easy, John, but if we don't act now, the purists will only grow stronger. This is our chance to turn the tide. John sighed, running a hand through his hair. Fine. What do I have to do? The plan was set into motion that night, while Exera and a team of Cerulean operatives prepared to infiltrate the purist facility. John and Lyris attended a public council event, a grand gathering meant to address the growing unrest. The council chamber was packed with citizens, their glowing eyes fixed on the raised platform where the leaders stood. John stood beside Lyris, feeling the weight of countless stares. Some were filled with hope, others with disdain. As the council leader began to speak, Lyris leaned toward John and whispered, Stay calm. The purists are likely watching. Your presence here will force them to focus on us rather than Zyra's team. Easy for you to say, John muttered. You're not the one everyone wants to kill. Before Lyris could respond, a loud commotion erupted near the entrance. A group of protesters had forced their way into the chamber, shouting slogans against the hybridization plan. The guards moved to intervene, but the tension in the room was palpable. One of the protesters, a tall Cerulean with jagged markings on his arms, stepped forward. This human doesn't belong here, he shouted, his voice echoing. He's a danger to our people. John felt a surge of anxiety as all eyes turned to him. He took a deep breath, remembering what Lyris had said about staying calm. I'm not here to hurt anyone, he said, his voice steady. I'm here to help. Your ambassador brought me here because she believes we can save your people together. Lies. The protester spat. You're nothing but an invader, corrupting our purity. Before John could respond, a sudden explosion rocked the chamber. The force threw him to the ground, and the air filled with smoke and debris. Panic erupted as citizens screamed and scattered. Lyris grabbed his arm, pulling him to his feet. We need to get out of here. What the hell was that? John shouted over the chaos. An attack, Lyris said, her voice grim. The purists are escalating. As they fled the chamber, John's communicator buzzed. Zyra's voice came through, crackling with static. "We're inside the facility. The weapon is real, and it's almost operational." "What do we do?" John asked, his heart pounding. "Stall them," Zyra replied. "We need more time." John clenched his fists, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The Purists were more dangerous than he had ever imagined, and the fate of an entire species hung in the balance. It was time to take a stand. The galactic showdown. The city of Eloria was a battleground. John's heart raced as he sprinted through the marble halls of the Cyrillan Palace, flanked by Lyris and a team of security personnel. The explosion in the council chamber had shaken the entire city, sending waves of panic through the streets. The Purists weren't just protesting anymore. They were fighting for control. "Where's Zyra?" John panted, trying to catch his breath as they ducked into a narrow corridor. He had no idea how he had gotten here, but every part of him screamed that they were running out of time. "She's at the facility," Lyris said, her voice tight. "She's doing her best to keep the Purists distracted, but the weapon they've developed is far worse than we anticipated. If it's activated, it could destroy the entire city." John's mind raced. He had only just learned about the gravity of the situation. What the Purists were planning was nothing short of catastrophic, and he somehow had become the fulcrum of the struggle. "We can't let them activate it. What are we waiting for?" Lyris hesitated, glancing down the hallway as if expecting an ambush. "We need to regroup. We need the Council's full support if we're going to stop them. We can't afford to act recklessly." John gritted his teeth. The Council, split between pro-hybridization members and Purist sympathizers, was no longer a reliable ally. The violence in the streets had made it clear. Factionalism had reached its boiling point. "This isn't about politics anymore," he said, his voice firm. "The whole planet's at stake." The sound of approaching footsteps made them all freeze. "Get down," Lyris hissed. They ducked into a nearby alcove just as a group of Purist soldiers marched past, their boots echoing through the empty hallway. John pressed his back against the cool wall, trying to steady his breath. His mind was a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. He had never imagined he would be here, in a war-torn alien city, fighting for a future he barely understood. But something inside him told him that he couldn't back down now, not with so much on the line. Lyris gave him a sharp look. "You're right. The Council is fractured, but if we can secure the energy core beneath the palace, we can override the Purist weapon." John frowned. "And how exactly are we supposed to do that?" "Follow me," she said simply, already turning down another corridor. The palace's lower levels were a labyrinth of narrow passageways and hidden chambers. The deeper they went, the darker and more oppressive the atmosphere became. Eventually, they arrived at a large metallic door that hummed with energy. A small terminal next to it blinked with green lights. "This is it," Lyris said, stepping up to the terminal. She swiftly input a sequence of commands, and the door slid open with a soft hiss. Beyond it lay a vast chamber filled with shimmering blue energy. At the center, an enormous crystalline core pulsed with light. John's breath caught in his throat. "That's the energy core." Lyris nodded. "Yes. It's the heart of Eloria's power grid, but it also controls the activation of the Purist weapon. If we can tap into it, we can override their system." Before John could respond, the air around them crackled. The doors behind them slammed shut, and a loud voice boomed through the chamber. "Lyris, you think you can stop this?" The voice was cold, mocking. John spun around to see a figure stepping from the shadows, a tall Cyrillan male with sharp features, his eyes glowing with the unmistakable hue of Purist energy. He was flanked by two heavily armed soldiers. "Viron," Lyris spat, her eyes narrowing. "I should have known it was you behind this." Captain Viron, the leader of the Purist faction, smiled darkly. "You should have. I warned you, Lyris. You can't fight destiny. The hybridization plan will fail, and with it, your entire species. John's pulse quickened. This was it, the confrontation that would determine the fate of Eloria. Viron raised a hand, and the soldiers aimed their weapons at Lyris and John. "It's over," Viron said. "The weapon is already primed. Even if you destroy this core, we've already activated the failsafe. Eloria will burn, and your precious hybrids will be nothing but ashes." Lyris stood tall, unflinching. "You've underestimated us, Viron. There are more forces at play here than you realize." The chamber suddenly lit up with an explosive flash of light, blinding everyone momentarily. A loud crash followed by a voice from above startled John. "Did you really think I'd let you have all the fun?" The voice was unmistakable. It was Kyra. Viron's face twisted with rage as he turned to look up. "Zyra," he growled. "You're too late." But Xera wasn't alone. A dozen Cyrillan operatives, all armed and ready for combat, dropped down from the rafters above, catching the purists off guard. The soldiers fired, but Xera and her team were too fast, moving with deadly precision. The battle erupted in a blur of motion. Xera and the operatives clashed with the purist soldiers, weapons firing, energy blasts lighting up the room. Viron, enraged, moved toward the crystalline core, trying to reach the terminal that controlled the weapon. "Stop him!" Lyris shouted, but it was already too late. Viron slammed his hand onto the terminal, and the core flickered in response. "No!" John yelled, his instincts kicking in. Without thinking, he ran toward Viron, determined to stop him. Viron turned just as John reached him, his eyes flashing with dark energy. "You think you can stop this? You're nothing but a tool, a pawn in a game you don't understand." John lunged, grabbing Viron's arm and slamming him into the ground. "I may be a pawn," John grunted, "but I'm not giving up without a fight." Viron struggled beneath him, but John didn't let go. He needed to destroy the weapon. He needed to end this madness. As he wrestled with Viron, he saw Lyris move toward the energy core, her fingers flying over the terminal, trying to access the failsafe system. The purist leader growled in frustration, pushing John off of him. "You're wasting your time, human," Viron sneered, backing away. "You can't stop what's already been set in motion." John's mind raced. But then, in that moment, something clicked. He glanced at Lyris, whose face was illuminated by the core's shimmering light, and he knew what he had to do. "Lyris," he shouted, "override the system. I'll hold him off." Lyris nodded, her eyes steely with determination. As she tapped the final key, a wave of energy rippled through the room. The core's pulsing slowed, then stopped completely. Viron's eyes widened in disbelief. "No." With a final, desperate move, Xera launched herself at him, knocking him out cold with a swift strike. The purists had lost. As silence descended on the chamber, John took a deep breath. They had done it. The weapon was neutralized, and Eloria had been saved, at least for now. But he knew this victory was only the beginning. There was still much to be done, and the galaxy's fate hung in the balance. The final choice. The air on Eloria had shifted, charged with a palpable sense of uncertainty. The skies above the palace were dotted with the occasional drone patrol, and the city was eerily quiet, as if it was holding its breath. The battle was over, but the war was far from won. The purist faction had been dealt a blow, but their influence still lingered in the shadows, a constant threat that hung over every decision now. John stood at the edge of a balcony overlooking the city. The sprawling metropolis was beautiful in the fading light, its crystal towers reflecting the hues of the setting suns, but the unrest in the streets, now replaced with quiet murmurs, was unmistakable. The planet, while saved from immediate destruction, was still in turmoil. The hybridization project was still at the center of it all, and the question of whether Eloria would embrace change or cling to its fractured past was yet to be answered. Behind him, he could hear the faint footsteps of Lyris approaching. her silhouette framed by the soft glow of the setting suns. Her presence, calm and composed, was a stark contrast to the chaos that had engulfed the planet. "You did well," Lyris said softly, her voice carrying the weight of 1,000 untold stories. John turned, forcing a smile despite the heavy burden on his chest. "I didn't do it alone." Lyris smiled faintly. "No, you didn't." She glanced out at the city, her eyes reflecting a deep sadness. "But you've done more than you realize, John. You've given us a chance to rebuild." "Rebuild?" John repeated. "How? After everything that's happened, how can you possibly rebuild anything?" Lyris took a deep breath and stepped closer to him, her eyes locking with his. "Our species is on the brink of extinction. We're fractured. Half of our people believe the future lies in a hybrid future. The other half believe it lies in the past, in preserving purity. That conflict is tearing us apart." John rubbed his face, the weight of her words settling heavily on his shoulders. "And I'm supposed to fix that. I'm not a leader, Lyris. I'm just a guy who accidentally sent a signal into space." "You're more than that, John," Lyris said gently, her gaze steady. "You were chosen not because you were the strongest or the most capable, but because you are human. You represent a new possibility, a chance for two species to come together, to heal, to survive." "But I don't have the answers," he replied, his voice low. "I don't know how to make that happen. How do you fix something like this?" Lyris stepped back, looking toward the horizon. "You don't fix it all at once. It takes time. But the first step is understanding. Understanding that change is painful, that it's messy, and that not everyone will agree with it. The second step is finding those willing to take the first step with you. You've already taken that step, John. Now it's up to us to decide how to walk the rest of the path." John stared at her, at a loss for words. The enormity of the situation was still sinking in. "And what if we fail?" "We won't," Lyris said firmly, turning to face him again. "But failure is a possibility we must face head-on. If we do fail, it will not be because we didn't try. It will be because the forces working against us are too powerful. And that's something we can't control. But what we can control is how we face those forces." John swallowed hard, his throat dry. "I don't know if I'm ready for this, Lyris." Lyris smiled warmly, a genuine, comforting expression that softened her features. "You're ready. You've already shown that. We may not know what comes next, but together, we can face whatever the future holds." The silence between them stretched, and for a moment, John felt a sense of calm he hadn't experienced since arriving on Aloria. Despite the threats, the battles, and the uncertainty, there was something undeniable about the bond they had formed. Something that felt like hope. It was fragile, but it was there. "Lyris," John began slowly, "what happens now? What do we do next?" Lyris walked up to the edge of the balcony and gazed out at the city once more. "Now, we wait. We wait for the Council to make its decision on the future of the hybridization plan. We wait for the people of Aloria to choose. And we wait for those like the purists to make their next move." "And what about me?" John asked, his voice uncertain. Do I stay here? Do I go home?" Lyris turned to face him, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of sadness and determination. "That, John, is your choice. You have done more for us than you can ever know. But I cannot ask you to stay if it is not what you want. You've already given us your time, your courage, your trust. Now you must decide what comes next for you." John exhaled slowly, the weight of her words hitting him like a freight train. The future of Aloria was uncertain, and his role in it was equally ambiguous. He had come here by accident, thrown into a war he didn't understand, but now he found himself in the middle of a galactic struggle for survival. Was it his responsibility to stay, to fight for a future that wasn't even his own? "I don't know what's next," John said, his voice hoarse. "But I know one thing. I don't want to walk away. Not after everything." Laris smiled, a warmth in her eyes. You don't have to. You've already chosen. The weight of her words lingered in the air, and John stood there, his heart and mind torn in 1,000 directions. But one thing was clear. He had a purpose now, whether he understood it fully or not. His journey had begun as a mistake, an accident, but now it was something more. As he stood on the balcony, gazing out at the city below, John felt the faint stirrings of something deep within him, a sense of purpose. The choice had always been his to make, and now the path was his to walk. A new chapter had begun, not just for him, but for Eloria, for the Cerulean, and for the galaxy itself. The future was uncertain, but as long as they fought together, there was hope. The decision had been made.